Hey, it's Matt Pinfield, and this is KLOS New and Approved. And tonight, my guest is one of my childhood heroes, and I actually get to call him a friend these days, which is really, for me, it's pretty amazing. It's the one and only Alice Cooper. Alice, it's so good to see you. I'm doing extremely well. I got to say, it's been great working with you for a good part of the last 2 weeks on this TV show called No Cover, where you're one of the main judges. It's you, Gavin Rossdale from Bush, Lizzie Hale, a lot of people I play on the radio show, of course. So it's been a real pleasure just watching you guys in action and being a part of it. But I'm really happy to have you here today because, I love this new record that you have out, Detroit Stories.
Started out as not a concept. We were just going to do, Bob Ezrin and I decided, let's do a really great rock and roll album with like 12 little gems, just 12 really great little rock tunes. And then we said, well, where are we going to do this? And we went, Nashville doesn't work. You can't do hard rock, really. Los Angeles doesn't really work for that. And we just decided, let's go to where hard rock is, the king, Detroit. When we got to Detroit, then we said, well, we're going to write the album here. We're going to record the album here. Let's use all Detroit players. Now, that was a little bit different for me because I'm used to working with, Nita Strauss and Ryan Roxie and guys like that. So when we decided that became the concept then, make it a full Detroit album using fully Detroit players. And then we realized Wayne Kramer was available and Johnny B from Mitch Ryder on drums, who was the epitome of Detroit. Well, those two guys alone are walking Detroit. I mean, you can't get more Detroit than Wayne Kramer and Johnny B. And then, we just started filling in, and Mark Farner. And there were so many great players.
Yeah, and Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad. That's so great. Wayne, of course, MC5. It's all these guys that were your contemporaries, making records back in the early days.
Yeah. We knew these guys in 1969 when we lived in Detroit. So, it was like we were all kids together over there. Just all the bands in Detroit were just local bands. Iggy and the Stooges, the MC5, Seeger, Ted Nugent, Susie Quattro. We were all local bands. We were not national bands. We didn't have any hit records out at that point. I think we were the first one with 18 that had really a national hit. And but the other guy, it was such a great rock scene because everybody was friends. We went to after every show there was a party, and it was all the bands, that all showed up and just sat around and talked about music, talked about all the silly things that bands go through. And then I watched every one of those bands become an international band.
Including yourself, which was the first, So, and speaking of that, you just recently celebrated 50 years since 1971's Love It to Death album, which is the album that I got introduced to you on when I was a kid. I remember getting my ass kicked boxing in a garage, playing that with my friends when I was a kid. That album was on all the time. And so it always brings me right back. It's such a great record. It's an important record for you, Alice, because, obviously that was the first time you worked with Bob Ezrin.
So not only that, but it was really, I think that was the first Alice Cooper record. To be honest with you, Pretty's for You, when we worked with Frank Zappa, was more songs that we wrote when we were the Spiders and the Nas. When we were, early days, we wrote all those songs back then. And same with Easy Action. Even though we were called Alice Cooper at the time, those songs were carryovers from those first two bands. And that was still the same guys. It's just that when we got with Bob Ezrin, Bob said to us, look, why is it that when you hear the Doors, it's the Doors? They have a signature sound. Nobody plays keyboards like Ray Manzarek. Nobody plays guitar like Robbie Krieger. And Jim Morrison's got his own distinct voice, so it's the Doors. And same thing with the Rolling Stones. He says, everybody loves your act, but you have no musical signature right now. And that's what Bob brought to the table. We started writing Love It to Death. And by the end of that album, you could put the album on and everybody go, oh, that's Alice Cooper. Because Bob gave us that musical signature, that identity. And from then on, people knew Alice Cooper sound. the Alice Cooper sound. So, I mean, Bob really did, he was our George Martin, you know. He did with us what George Martin did with the Beatles.
He certainly did, and now you're working with him again. You've had this long-term relationship. You end up working together. And I love the story that it was because, Bob and his Canadian connection, that the song 18 started getting play on the Canadian radio stations, which that spilled over into the United States because of this thing called Canadian content, where a certain amount of music has to have a Canadian connection to get played on the radio. So everything wasn't American or British back in those days. So 18, right?
PLW was the biggest station in the Midwest, but it came out of Windsor, Canada. So if you got a hit on CKLW, that was like getting a hit on LOS, I mean, it was like, that was a very big deal in the Midwest if you were getting played on CKLW. And you have to remember back then, at this time, if you got in the top 40, you were up against the Beatles, Led Zeppelin,
Stones, right?
I mean, everybody.
Yeah.
It was really hard to get a song in that slot because the slots were all taken. Motown, you were up against Simon and Garfunkel, all these guys. And then here comes this song 18, which is kind of like a punk anthem. And it seemed to fit right in. It seemed to be this was what was going to happen sooner or later. And she, was the one that I listened to it, and she goes, "Oh yeah," she said, "This is the future." So we got that play, and then the song became a hit after that.
It's amazing when you think about it too, because the whole connection of the song 18 to punk rock and Johnny Rotten's love of you. And the fact that when he auditioned for the Sex Pistols, the song that he sang was 18 off that jukebox,
Yes.
which, changed everything in British music. So it was directly a result of something that you had done in 1971, which is amazing. Talk to me about that, because I know he obviously is a big fan of yours, and he's talked to you about that in the past, and you've had that conversation.
Well, he told me that when the Sex Pistols, before the Sex Pistols, he used to be busing, down at the subway, station down there with Sid Vicious and a couple of guys. But they weren't doing like Irish pub songs or English pub songs. They were doing like I Love the Dead, I Cry, and things like that. So you can imagine how disturbing that might have been. But that was, that song 18 was just one of those songs that we wanted to be. America's Yardbirds is who we wanted to be. Bob Ezrin says, what you're missing is the fact that the simplicity of a song is what makes it powerful. And, he finally kept saying, dumb it down, dumb it down, dumb it down, get it dumber. And to the point where it was just finally down, 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 down. And then when you heard it on the radio, it sounded powerful. And it said, I'm 18, I'm chaotic, I can't do this, I can't do that. And then the hook on it was, I'm 18 and I like it. Yeah. I love it. So the guy's going, I love the chaos in my life. I love being 18. I love being irresponsible, Yeah. And that was the hook.
Yeah, it was amazing. So that's celebrated its 50th anniversary, the album Love It to Death. But one of the most amazing things happened recently, and that is that you've had your first #1 album with the new album Detroit Stories in 48 years since Billion Dollar Babies in 1973. Tell me about how you found that out from your wife, Cheryl. Like, this story is great. I love that. Tell me that.
Well, it's so funny because I try every 48 years to have a #1 album, my next one will be some way in the future. But what happened was the album came out. And, I thought, well, it might do okay. I mean, it's a really good album and it rocks like crazy. And people are ready right now for a happy album, an album that rocks and is an up album. We're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel from, this whole pandemic thing. And so it just happened at the right time. She picks up her phone and she goes, look at this. And it's an article and it says, Alice Cooper debuts at #1 in Billboard. And I went, who put that on there? I said, come on. I said, one of the guys put that on there. That's a total farce. And then I said, go to Billboard magazine. We go to Billboard and it goes, Alice Cooper debuts at #1. And believe me, I just went, what? I said, does everybody know this? We better call Shep and tell him, Shep is very aware of all this stuff. So yeah, I mean, it was really, really cool. Now, of course, that doesn't reflect the record sales that it would have in the 70s at all. It's a whole different world now with Spotify and all the different, ways of listening to music and buying music. But it was still really nice to be relevant and to the point where an Alice Cooper album, I've been around 55 years, is a rock and roll album is relevant. I know Gene Simmons was going, rock is dead. Well, I don't think so. I think there's an awful lot of young rock bands that are out there learning Aerosmith songs, learning Guns N' Roses, learning 16-year-old kids that want to be in a rock band. And, so I don't think rock is dead at all.
No, neither do I. And whenever people say that, I say, well, you know what? Guitars are selling more now than ever. That's the word that's out. Young people are picking up guitars and instruments and learning how to play and learning how to sing and listening to great music. So there are a lot of great young bands out there. And speaking of which, we're working on that show, No Cover, together, where, you're a judge with Gavin Rossdale Bush and Lizzie Hale and a bunch of other folks. And it's just been great working with you on that show and just seeing you every day. And, I see how the audience, not the audience, but the artists react to you, Alice, because they have so much respect. And you've given some people some really good advice. Because I'm the guy usually who speaks to the artist afterwards and goes, so was there something the judges said to you that stuck with you? And it always comes back to something that you said, which I think is great. And I love that you're there and you want to help nurture new talent and support new talent.
Well, I remember when we were that age, we just wanted to rock. We just wanted to get in a band because, first of all, girls.
Of course.
When you're in high school, that's your truth, is you're trying to attract girls. And, of course, you might make some money, and you're never really expecting to get it past playing parties or playing a bar or anything like that. But I'm looking at these bands now with 55 years of experience, and I'm looking at them going, guys, do you want to be a rock star? And if they say yes, I go, then be a rock star. Don't be the guy from the mall. Don't be the guy that shows up, just wearing what you wore to school. If you're going to be on stage and you're going to be in front of an audience, be bigger than life. That's the only time when your ego should be intact, is up there on stage. People want to see you to be a rock star. So that means don't be part of the public. After the show, yeah, you can go down and be part of the public. But when you're on stage, be that monster that they want. Be that rock star that they want. Freddie Mercury, Mick Jagger, guys like that. They were bigger than life. And that's what you want your rock stars to be. So if you're going to be a rock star, be a rock star.
Absolutely. Alice, one of my favorite stories always goes back to how smart you and Shep and everybody were back, in those early days. Like this incident that took place in London in Piccadilly Circus, which, is basically like our Times Square in London, when there was a giant billboard of just you and the snake. You were naked, but it was you and the snake, right? And it was... They broke that truck down right in the middle of rush hour, which is such a great story. I mean, no better way to get in the newspapers but to piss everybody off, of course, and to stop traffic. Tell me about that incident and how that came about. Was that something that Shep came up with? Where was that conversation?
It was one of those things where, they already tried to ban us in England. And when you try to ban somebody, your record goes right to #1. And you sell out every ticket. So people were so anxious to see what this Alice Cooper, this American Alice Cooper monster was. And, we had already sold out Wembley, and people, were going, what are they, who are these guys? So we decided that the old publicity stunt, the old Hollywood publicity stunt, we're either going to be in jail tomorrow or they're going to get the joke. So we had this big giant picture that Avedon did of me laying sideways with a snake between my legs, this giant snake. And it's the size of a truck, a lorry, they called it, of course.
Yeah.
We made sure that it stalled at Piccadilly Square on rush hour on Friday.
When everybody's trying to go home. It's great.
Everybody's trying to go home. And the next day, it's on the front page of the London Times. Da, 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 da. And they realized, they laughed about it. They thought it was a great publicity stunt. They got it. They got the fact that we were putting them on and we were doing something that outrageous. And they approved of it. You know, not everybody did. I'm sure people trying to get home didn't, but the press loved it. And then we started doing more and more publicity stunts over there because we realized that we were bringing a little bit of Hollywood to London, you know, and the outrageousness of doing something that crazy in London, you know, very conservative London. Well, we said, I think London's got a better sense of humor than that. And really, they loved it. And after that, you know, people actually thought we were a British band in America because we actually broke in England bigger than we broke in America. And it was like Jimi Hendrix. Everybody thought Jimi Hendrix was British. You know, he's from Seattle. Here's a bunch of these kids from Phoenix, Arizona that were outraging the entire country and loving it. They were loving it. But the thing about it is once you do that, if you don't deliver a show or deliver music that's equally as outrageous and on the same level of quality, then you become ridiculous. If you can come up and do a show, we actually did a show that was more than they were even expecting. It was a production. They were going, what is this? We've never seen anything like this. So the idea is once you get their attention, deliver. Then you've got to deliver something.
You've always been, you know, one of the masters and originators of great theatrical rock, no question about it. And I remember when you were on ABC in concert when I was a young kid, and speaking of America, the country was outraged when they saw the guillotine and, you know, the snake. And I remember the next week they like bleeped out even the slightest word on David Bowie's performance because they were freaked out at all the complaints they got. But kids loved it. And they went out and bought the records. They went out and bought School's Out, Killer, and then $1 Billion Babies being a #1 record. Talk to me about what it was like at that point when you knew, you know, here's these guys, that some of them were on a track team together. You were playing the Beatles when you were kids, friends in Phoenix. All of a sudden, you've got a #1 album, 1973, $1 Billion Babies. What was that feeling like?
You would think that would be an ego booster. To us, I was a bit embarrassed in the fact that I would look at the charts and my record was above the Stones and my record was above the Beatles. I almost wanted to call them up and say, I am really sorry. You are the masters. We are the students. And I got lucky. You know, I was trying to, and yet the Beatles were talking in certain press things, talking about how much they loved Alice Cooper. And to me, that was just surrealistic. You know, the fact that they even knew who I was, or Bob Dylan would say something about my songwriting. You know, to me, I was going, how is this possible that these people even know who I am? I mean, it's humbling rather than egotistical. You know, of course, once you hit that peak, then you go, well, I guess I'm in the club now, but I still feel like I'm a junior member, you know. Now I'm more of the elder statesman, you know, the Hollywood vampires and the whole thing. You know, we were sort of elder statesmen of rock and roll. And but I still think like I did back then. I'm still thinking like I did when I did Love It to Death. Same process in songwriting and performing.
And I think that's because, you know, it's our love for rock and roll. It's the thing that keeps you young and vital. It's so important, you know. And, you know, I got to ask you, since we've been shooting over at the Troubadour, you spent so many years on the Strip there. I mean, of course, guys had that upstairs area at the Rainbow where you all used to hang out with you and Keith Moon, which is pretty amazing. So is it interesting when you go back there and we're, like, say we're sitting there and we're shooting, Alice, you're like, wow, I got some unbelievable memories from being here. It's just been there's so many crazy memories, I'm sure.
Well, especially the Troubadour. I never went to the Troubadour. It was just too small, and they had folk acts there. I think Elton was the biggest band ever played there. When he was very young, it was perfect. It was just him and a piano, and that's where he sprung up. People just went, "Oh, you got to see this guy, Elton." A great story about this is Shep was managing Anne Murray, and now Anne Murray's a great lady, but not rock and roll at all, And Shep came to me and he says, "Could you do me a big favor? You guys drink every night at the Rainbow." It was like John Lennon and Harry Nilsson and Keith Moon and Mickey Dolenz and Bernie Taupin and myself. He says, "Could you get the Vampires to show up over at the Troubadour to see Anne Murray?" And I went, "Oh boy." So I asked them, could we all go to the Troubadour? And they all went, "Yeah," kind of pulling teeth, So we all go over there. We take a picture with Anne Murray. That gets an international. The picture is so great. The next day they're interviewing Anne Murray. And they said, "Wow, what a big audience you had last night. I mean, John Lennon and Keith Moon, Harry Nilsson and Alice Cooper and all these guys, they came to see you." And she goes, "Yeah. Anyway, the next album is..."
It's so funny.
And so I show up that night at the Rainbow, and they're all sitting there like this. "Yeah?" That was the response. "Yeah?" And I went, "Okay, drinks are on me for the next week."
Which they were. That's amazing. One of the other great stories I've always loved is how the song "Billion Dollar Babies" was recorded, and you guys were all hanging out, and everybody was Mark Bolan was there, obviously Keith Moon. People were little three sheets to the wind, as they say, or Donovan ends up doing this duet vocal with you, which was so out of character, and it was great at the same time. Tell me about that session.
Well, we had already done "Schools Out," which was it was #1 album in England, and so we decided to record "Billion Dollar Babies" at Morgan Studios in London, and we got there, and of course, those were all of my friends, so we're pretty much at the end of a session, and all of a sudden, here comes Harry Nilsson, Mark Bolan, Ringo, Keith Moon, Rick Gretsch, and drunk. And they all decide they're going to play on a song.
Yeah.
Now, what they didn't realize was we were just as drunk at that point of the night. Bob was the only one. Ezrin was the only one that was sober because it was the end of the night. We'd already finished recording. And they all pick up, first of all, Keith Moon picks up a guitar. All right. Harry Nilsson gets on the drums. Everybody's playing the instrument they don't play. Yeah. The only guy playing a real instrument, I think, was Mark Bolan. To this day, we can't remember who played on what on that album. There was a version of "Put the Lime in the Coconuts" that if it ever gets released, we'll all be in jail. There was another version of Jailhouse Rock, I think we did. And finally, Bob Ezrin had to put an end to the session because it was just so incredibly silly. But when we started doing the credits on the album, we couldn't remember where Mark Bolan played, what song. And we couldn't remember where Harry played piano or where Keith Moon played drums or Ringo, any of that stuff. And, that was definitely one of the, when you hear of stories about the 70s, this was one of those stories. This was equal to the Lost Weekend that night at the Morgan Studios.
Yeah, that's true debauchery at that period of time, right? But Donovan ended up coming in. So was that your invitation when he came in? Or did you just think it would be a cool idea?
Well, when we did Billion Dollar Babies, we had the idea that we're in England. Why don't we have somebody saying the lyrics while I'm singing them? "We go dancing nightly in the attic." And I said, somebody going, "We go dancing nightly in the attic." And I said, "Who's in the studio?" And they said, "Donovan's right next door." So I went next door and I said, "Donovan, I'm Alice Cooper." And he goes, "Yes, I know. Yeah, I know." And I said, "Would you like to be on a real rock and roll album?" And he goes, "I would love to." So I brought him in, and he had more fun I think doing that. Every time I see Donovan now, it's like we can go into $1 Billion Babies, because he had the perfect British voice for that. He even put on the real posh British voice, and it's just one of those perfect moments that, could only happen spontaneously.
It was great because of the juxtaposition of his voice and your voice and then switching off those parts was so cool.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. So when it came time for In Detroit Stories, reaching out to your old friends, like I said, Wayne Kramer of the MC5 and Mark Farner from Grand Funk. These are guys that you played with, years ago. There's that famous show with you around the time, I would say, of Love It to Death, or even before it came out. It was 1970 Cincinnati, and it was Iggy and the Stooges, right? And Grand Funk were playing that show. I remember you did Black Juju on that show. And it was all those guys. And I remember the guy who actually had the idea to put that concert on TV got fired right after it was on. Because
the director got fired. The guy from ABC got fired for even putting it on the air, even though it was on at midnight. It was on at midnight. And they were so upset between Iggy and Alice on the same show. Iggy's walking around the audience with peanut butter all over him, and he's doing contortions, and Alice Cooper's, just the very idea of those two bands being on national TV. That was ABC.
Especially at that time.
Yeah, it wasn't some, local thing. It was national. So that guy immediately got fired, which I thought was a feather in his cap.
Yeah. Well, he did something great for rock and roll. There's no question about that. Alice, listen, I want to just say thank you so much for doing this today. It's so good to have you on the air here on KLOS. I know, you've been a big part of the station for many, many years. And like I said, I've been a fan from day one. And we've had many a conversation about me just picking your brain about all those great records that I love that you've done. So thanks for doing the show.
Thank you, Matt. And, I personally can't wait to see the no cover, what's going to happen on that, it's a mystery who's going to win this thing.
Yeah, it's good. You've been giving the bands good advice, and even the solo performers. It's been really cool, and it's. You can hear the pitfalls.
You can hear the pitfalls of songwriting. When a young band is writing a song, and you go, okay, when you get to that chorus, it's not paying off, and they go, what does that mean? And I said, well, when you get to the chorus, I want to be able to sing that chorus the very first time I hear it. That's why the Beatles were so good, is you knew the song. And then I have to think to myself, these guys are 16. I want to say, you do know who the Beatles are, right?
Yeah. Luckily, I think everything should start with the Beatles. I mean, it's one of those things. I'm sure probably with your children as well, and with my daughters, that was the same thing. It was like Beatles, first thing you turn your kids on to,
Absolutely. Beatles, Beach Boys, Four Seasons. I raised my kids on those three bands. And then I said, now that you know what good songs are, I said, now you can branch off and find out who you really like. I said, but this is the genesis of rock and roll right here. Modern rock is the Beatles.
Yeah, it's so great. It's stuff, and it just holds up. And, congratulations, on the #1 album, on the 50th anniversary of Love It to Death. I guess there is one last question I'd like to ask you. I know I said goodbye, but it's great that you've worked with the guys again that were on all those early albums, $1 Billion Babies albums. And I know you're really close to Dennis Dunaway, of course, and having the guys. Is it fun to get back in the studio with them when you do? What does it feel like to play with the boys again?
When our band broke up, we didn't divorce as much as we separated. There was no bad blood. There were no lawyers. There was no... it was just a matter of us all going in our different directions. We had just done 5 albums in a row without a rest. We did 5 albums and toured. When we weren't recording, we were touring. And it just got to a point where I think we were becoming dysfunctional. And I think we all recognized that, and we just all kind of like spread apart. But we never, ever were enemies. And so Dennis and I stayed in touch with each other over all those years. So same with Neil, same with Mike. Glenn passed away when Glenn passed away, he was our Keith Richards. So it was never going to sound like Alice Cooper again without Glenn. He was a very unique ingredient to Alice Cooper. And so on the last 4 albums that I've done, the original band has been on all 4 of those albums. They've done 2 or 3 songs on those albums, and they're playing as good as they've ever played. Dennis, Neil, and Mike are playing, just as valid as they've ever played. So I'm doing more projects with them, all the time. If people think that the original Alice Cooper band broke up, we didn't really break up. We just separated for a while.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, because that band, as you know, your band was like just the musicianship was incredible on those records. I listened to all that stuff.
Bob brings that out in you. Bob Ezrin works you hard in the studio, but he gets the best out of you. And he gets you to do things you didn't think you could do.
I mean, Dennis, his bass playing is almost like a lead. He plays like a lead. He's just some of those runs he did on songs like Generation Landslide and Gutter Cat versus the Jets are just, they're incredible. I mean, just the whole band. I mean, it's just the sound of those. They still sound like they have a wow factor when you hear them. You go, holy, listen to these guys play, Well,
something really interesting. When we did the last European tour we did in England, the original band came out with us, and we would do our show, the regular show. And, of course, my band with Nita and Roxy and, Glenn Sobel, and Chuck Garrick and Tommy Henriksen. That's an all-star. I mean, that band is so tight. It's stupid. They're so tight. And we got done with the show. Curtains come down, and then the curtains come back up, and it's the original band. And we did 5 songs. So the review, it said, oh, man, the show was so good. It was sparkling. It was clean. Alice was at the top of his game. And then it got dangerous. Because the original band played differently. They played a little heavier. They played a lot darker. And I sing even differently when I sing with the original band. So all of a sudden, a song like 18 he sounded like a threat.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that's the great thing about it, was the fact that the original band has still got that. They still got that dangerous thing about them. And that's why I love working with the guys,
Absolutely. And that's why you became such a big icon and a popular band star, because you brought that dangerous element to rock and roll, which rock and roll needs. It's good to see that. So Alice, thank you for taking the time. What's that? I'm sorry.
I said it's the outlaw effect.
Yeah.
Rock and roll needs a certain amont of outlaw. And I'll see you down there. I'll see you down there today.
Yeah, I'll see you later today on the set tonight, which will be great.
Okay.
It's excellent to see you. Alice, thank you so much for doing this with us today. And congratulations on the #1 album, the anniversaries, and maybe we'll do this in 48 years when you have your next #1 album. I'm sure we'll do it before then. But that was great. So thanks so much, Alice. It's good to see you.
You too, Matt. See you later.
So great catching up with the legendary Alice Cooper right here at KLOS is new and approved. I'm Matt Pinfield. Thanks so much for watching.